All right. What is anger?
Well, before I answer this question, I'd probably like to say that there are two types of it. And one type is related to our childhood and the other type is related to most of what we're going to speak about next.
Sure.
Most people's anger has nothing to do with their childhood anger, unfortunately. Most people's anger has a lot to do with what they want to express as an adult for reasons that they have as an adult to suppress their fear. So we need to firstly see that a childhood anger expression is going to be very, very different to an adult anger expression.
Yeah.
Childhood anger expression is generally not projected at anyone else. It doesn't blame the world or the universe for it. It feels the pain of the hurt and its own resistance to the pain of the hurt that's within. And that's the kind of anger some people have to feel. And I say some people because, obviously sometimes we got so goaded as children that we started to get angry, and then that was also suppressed. So obviously it's an emotion that we have to feel.
As adults, then we have to let it out.
We have to connect to that childhood expression of the anger. But when we do connect to that childhood expression of anger, we will not be projecting it upon anyone. We will not be yelling and screaming at somebody. We'll be feeling it internally and expressing it to ourselves generally. So it's very, very different to the type of anger that we're now going to talk about, which is the most common anger that everybody has.
Can I just clarify? You said we'll be expressing it to ourselves. You don't necessarily mean towards ourselves, do you? You mean just in an environment
where we ourselves are alone, and where we feel the pain of our own resistance. Which is very, very different to blaming everybody else for things, which is what most people's anger is for. And also, we start to recognise as a child that it was our desire to feel powerful in very powerless situations. And we allow ourselves to feel the grief associated with that kind of anger. And you'll feel the age of the anger too under those circumstances. So if the anger was created when you were 5, you will feel like you're 5 years old going through it. And you won't be expressing it to people because the reality is, as a child, you didn't express it to people. So that's the reason why it was suppressed, because you didn't express it. So the reality is you won't be projecting it at other people because you never would have chosen to do such a thing as a child. So you'll just feel it and feel the pain of it. And that's not the anger that we're now going to speak of.
Okay, so let's speak of this. This is the most common form of anger.
This is the most common form of anger that we're now going to speak of. The most common form of anger is a desire to have, it's an unmet desire to have your addictions met. So maybe
it arises.
Can we say that again?
It's
probably not the right thing to say. It arises because you have not met your addictions. In other words, the average person creates a whole set of addictions which are all about denying, suppressing, resisting or substituting their hard childhood emotions, their causal emotions, their painful emotions. So they want to suppress and deny all of those things. So what they do is they create a whole layer of addictions. When their addictions are no longer met by their environment or by the substance or by the physical act, they revert to anger and rage. Now, anger ranges from, it's a stored energy, so, it's an energy that can be stored or expressed.
In motion,
When it's in motion, when it becomes an emotion, it will be expressed as slight annoyance right the way through to extreme violent rage. Right?
It can be
anything in between that range. So whenever we talk about anger, we are talking about a group of emotions, not just a single emotion. And a group of emotions ranging from just a tiny little bit of annoyance right the way through to extreme rage. And the other thing about this anger, if you like, is that it is a desire to feel certain things that cause it. So it's not only just a desire to get your addictions met, but rather a desire when your addictions aren't met to get them met. Does that make sense?
So
initially when we want our addictions met, we're quite gentle with it all. Does that make sense? We generally, we're gentle with the people around us, we're gentle with the substances, we go, oh, that feels nice, and we have a bit more of that.
Yeah.
But after a while, it becomes non-satisfying, or if it ever does become unsatisfying, we are no longer satisfied in having our addictions met that way. It's not enough for us. And when it's not enough for us, now we revert to the anger-based feeling. The anger-based feeling gives us a lot of things, which we'll go through. I think we've listed 4 things that it gives us that we'll need to go through one by one.
Yeah, or really why we use it.
Correct.
What we're attempting to do by
what we're attempting to get
angry.
Yeah, when we get angry, yes. So we need to understand these particular things about anger. And this is the kind of anger that is completely out of harmony with love. It's got nothing to do with our childhood experience at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's the denial of our childhood experience that causes this kind of anger.
Yeah.
So we're trying as hard as we can to deny what we experience or need to, the experience we locked up as a child.
Yeah.
And so we revert to this kind of anger instead.
So that's very important what you just said. So the expression of this kind of anger does the opposite of helping our soul to grow.
Correct. It damages our soul,
yeah.
and it damages the souls of others, and particularly if we become violent with it, it's extremely damaging to our soul and the souls of others.
Okay, so can I clarify that a bit more?
Sure.
Because obviously you've said this kind of anger can be stored also.
It can be stored.
Or it can be in motion.
It can be in motion.
And expressed.
Yes.
So, but when we're expressing this kind of anger, we're actually heading away from any kind of causal emotion. We're actively trying to suppress our childhood experience.
We're using this kind of anger as a tool to suppress causal emotions which will help us heal.
Yeah.
So it's of no benefit to us to even experience this kind of anger.
Okay.
There's no single benefit to even experience it, really.
Yeah.
We need to find what's under it. Now, sometimes when you experience it, you will find what's under it.
Yeah.
But you need to experience it in a very, very controlled environment if you're ever going to not damage yourself or other people. And this is where you need to be completely alone experiencing this kind of anger. Otherwise, you are definitely going to damage yourself and other people. Right? And even if you're alone, there are times when you are damaging other people with it.
Yeah.
So particularly if they are open to the absorption of the emotion, then you're definitely damaging other people with it, even if you're alone.
So I know that later on in this series we're going to ask, we've got questions from people who speak to that.
Yes,
so.
And we need to also say that this kind of anger is the result of denial. It's the result of suppression. It's the result of resistance. It's the result of a substitution. We want the substitute for the harder emotion. And so it's all about using our will to get the substitute.
Yeah.
So it's got nothing to do with using our will in harmony with love anymore.
Yeah.
It's got everything to do with using our will to get the substitute done, to get the effect we want.
Yeah.
Right? And that is completely out of harmony with love. So that's going to damage our soul every time we engage it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what we're trying to do with this kind of anger.
Yes.
So the first thing is to control or manipulate the environment back into supporting our addictions.
Correct. So that's the primary reason why we revert to this kind of anger. We want whatever is happening in our environment to go back to the way it was.
Yeah, because that's where addictions were being met and we felt further distanced from
the true causal emotion that we need to feel.
Yeah.
So we're using anger as a tool to change our environment back to the condition that's unloving.
Yeah.
So we're trying to force our environment to become more unloving to suit our addiction.
Yeah.
And this is why it's damaging, because it's trying to force other people or things in our environment to meet our own unloving state. And that's a very, very unloving choice.
It is.
Yep.
And in prior discussions today, you've talked about how God's laws are operating to help expose what is suppressed within us. And we're acting in addiction to suppress it further rather than have it exposed.
Yes.
And then when we act in this anger, we're even acting further out of harmony with God's laws, aren't we? We're saying...
We're now resorting to violence.
Yeah.
Because even if it's emotional, it's still violence. You're trying to force the environment, something or someone in the environment, to go back to their old behaviour. That's not honouring free will at all. It's not honouring the free will of people in your environment. And it's also not honouring the fact that actually they're more loving to you when they don't do that. So it's not honouring love at all. Yes. It's not honouring truth at all. Yeah. In fact, it's in complete denial of love, truth, and also complete denial of a person's free will. It's the result of you not wanting to take personal responsibility for what's inside of you. And that is a very, very damaging course of action. And most people resort to it because it gets their environment to go back to what it was before. Yeah. And it's very, very damaging action. Yeah. Very damaging action. One of the most damaging things you can do to your soul is to resort to that kind of anger.
Okay. So, to control or manipulate the environment back into supporting our addictions?
Yes. Yep. So that's number one.
Number one.
Yep.
Number two, to punish our environment for not supporting our addictions.
Yes, this is even darker again.
Yeah.
Because basically what we're saying to our environment is we're saying, you're not doing what I want you to do. So now what I'm going to do is, not only am I going to force you to do what I want you to do, but I'm going to hurt you for not doing it.
Yeah.
So this is like wanting to punish or harm somebody because they didn't meet your addictions.
Yes.
And that's a very damaging course of actions. It's not very far from that most people, the reason why most people who die and pass into the hells of the spirit world is because they frequently have this emotion. This emotion that they feel completely willing to punish other people for what those other people didn't do or should have done for them. Yeah. 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 And it's a very, very damaging course of action to take for your own soul and for another, towards another.
And so some real life examples of this might be a parent belting a child.
Yes.
Or a person...
So a parent resorting to violence.
Yep.
Just because the child didn't do something the parent wanted.
Yep. Yes. And it's a punishment rather than just a yelling match to get them to do what they want. Yeah. Which might be the first form of anger. Correct. The second form is taking it beyond that to actually physically harming
the child.
Yep.
Yep. And creating violence towards the child.
Yep.
From a physical perspective as well as an emotional one.
Yep.
So the first level, you could say, that we went through, creates emotional violence. The second level is willing to resort to physical violence generally.
Yep.
Yep. It's a desire to punish another person. It's a desire to make their life hard, make their life difficult. To make their life more difficult than it currently is. As soon as you have that emotion, you're way out of harmony with love at that point.
And so, in the context of, say, a relationship, when I have a codependent addiction that you've been meeting for me.
Yes, so let's say, I make you feel safe and secure.
Safe and secure. We get in a situation where I no longer feel safe and secure.
So let's say I lost my job.
Yep, lost your job.
And so we're not going to regular income anymore, you no longer feel safe and secure.
I feel terrible. I don't want to feel terribly afraid. My addiction to feeling safe and secure that was met by you and your job is no longer there.
Yep. So you start projecting in me that I've got to go and get a job.
Yeah, get a job, hurry up. Every morning before, at 7 a.m, I'm yelling at you.
Or even just doing the manipulative thing. For example, just going, I've got to get you up, why don't you go out today? Why don't, making all these suggestions.
Yeah.
And you're not making them for my sake, you're making them for your own.
Yeah.
You're making them so that you don't have to feel certain things.
Yeah.
Which is selfish.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that would be an example
of the first
type of anger. So whether it's overt or covert,
it doesn't matter even if it's covert. It's like, I'll make you brekkie and I'll get you ready and all that kind of stuff.
Good on you.
That's all covert rage.
Covert rage.
Yeah.
Yep. And then, if it was to take it to the second level of punishing, then after 3 months and you still haven't got a job, I might resort to going, well, you're useless. The problem is you are lazy. The problem is you, and trying to then attack your character.
Or nature, or attack my situation personally, yes.
That would be an example of punishing?
That'd be now trying to punish the person for no longer allaying your fear.
So that's when we get into a darker state with this
Much
anger.
darker state with the anger now.
Got you.
So it might not have resorted to anything physical, but you're now in a violent state with this anger, and you're now quite what's the word I'm looking for? It's probably, you're now not only using emotional manipulation techniques now, you're using outright attack now to try and manipulate the person into changing their behaviour. Yeah. Right, so that's very, very damaging now. And you'd be saying, probably at that stage, you'd be saying very cutting things, you try to be humiliating, and if you don't resort to physical violence, you'll come close at times. You'll yell and scream and you throw things and whatever.
Yeah, so thank you for clarifying that. I wanted to make it clear that we can punish without physical violence, can't we?
Certainly, certainly. Yeah. You can even do things like, stuff this, I'm going to go and have sex with somebody else who makes me feel safe.
Wow, yeah.
Right? Which means you've said nothing to the person that made you feel unsafe, and you've got no idea inside of you why you went and had sex with somebody else, but you felt drawn to do so just because that person made you feel safe somehow and you felt sexually attracted to them as a result. And that is an act of rage.
An act of rage and addiction on your part.
And addiction on your part, yeah. Very damaging actions. And if you examine society in the world, you see this happening all the time, every day, these kind of actions.
Yeah, we do. And we don't call it anger necessarily.
No, we don't. We often call it, completely different things. Oh, that person's looking after themselves now, or oh, that person's got some self-worth now. No. Wow. Oftentimes they're just enraged and they are using passive-aggressive or aggressive ways to manipulate their environment to get back their addictions. Yeah.
Okay, third type of anger. We blame our environment for not supporting our addictions.
Yes, this is a bit different to punishment in the sense that we're basically saying our environment is responsible for the reason why we're not having our addictions met. In other words, we're not seeing it as a personal responsibility even for our own addictions to be met by ourselves. We think the environment is responsible for our addictions to be met, and our environment is also responsible to help us suppress our deeper emotions. And so we blame externally. We blame everyone else other than ourselves. In other words, we no longer take personal responsibility for any of our own feelings about what is happening.
Right.
And that is an external blame of other people, of other things, in order to avoid taking personal responsibility.
So what would an example of that be? Blaming the government, blaming the train system, blaming in
the previous example, I had sex with him because he's attractive. There's a blame of your environment. Had nothing to do with the fact that he was attractive. It had everything to do with the fact that you didn't feel safe.
Right, right.
So you're blaming the environment for the action you took, having sex with somebody who's not your marriage partner. Right? You're blaming it on something that you think, he was attractive and that's why I did it, when it had nothing to do with why you did it. The reason why you did it was because you were in denial of certain emotions, in particular emotions of safety and security, and he made you feel safe and secure, so you had sex with him. So
it's almost like a bit of misdirection. It's a bit of saying...
it's a way to avoid personal responsibility every time.
I'm a victim of this circumstance, whatever it is.
Yeah, we portray ourselves as victims of the circumstance and we're not to blame for our actions.
Yeah, got you. Yes.
So I'm punishing you right now and I'm also being manipulative right now, but I'm not to blame for my actions. It's because you did something.
And again, this is very dark, isn't it?
Very dark behaviour. Very dark behaviour. Any person who engages in that behaviour will be in the hells of the spirit world. Doesn't matter what their face portrays or anything else. They will arrive in the hells of the spirit world if they pass right at that point.
Okay, fourth type of anger.
Yep.
It's when we use anger to feel powerful and avoid feeling weak.
Yes, this is a very common use of anger, right? The use of anger to avoid the powerless emotions. So powerless emotions are emotions like fear and terror and sadness and grief. They are emotions where we don't feel powerful anymore. We don't feel like we're in control anymore. We don't feel like we've got our self-determination anymore. And so what we do is we revert to rage or anger in order to feel powerful and feel like we have control again.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're even angry with ourselves or angry with other people in that state. It doesn't really matter as long as we feel powerful in that state. Does that make sense? And when we feel powerful, we get to avoid all the powerless emotions, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why we revert to anger as well, in order to feel the power of it. Because anger is a very strong emotion, and often we do very strong things when we're angry.
Yeah.
Whereas when we think of emotions like fear or sadness, we don't see them as strong emotions. We see them as weak emotions generally. Society sees them as weak emotions generally. Mm-hmm. And so, reverting to a strong emotion so we can avoid the appearance of having a weak one is a very common reason for why people get angry.
Yeah.
And men in particular do this.
Yeah.
Because men are told that when they're, afraid or sad, they're weak. And so what they do is they often revert to anger in order to feel powerful and to demonstrate their power. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's not true. In fact, you're far less powerful angry than you were feeling a causal emotion from a soul perspective. Yeah. But most people aren't aware of that, of course.
So that is based on a lot of false beliefs that we have taken on in our childhood about the nature of emotion and what equates to feeling weak and strong and powerful and powerless.
Yeah, well, let's be more correct.
Yeah.
It equates to the childhood beliefs that were forced upon us by our environment, because it's highly unlikely we would have taken them on unless they were forced upon us.
Because taking them on or having them forced upon us made us suppress huge parts of our experience, didn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
And also in our childhood experience, many of us have experienced deep feelings of powerlessness and terror and fear and all sorts of emotions because of what happened as a child. And so, as an adult, we're trying to avoid those feelings quite strongly. So we revert to a powerful emotion in order to avoid all of these emotions we judge as weak and insipid.
Yeah.
And of course, our environment taught us as a child, that these emotions were weak and insipid. Mm-hmm. Fear and sadness was weak and insipid. And so what we do is the direct result of these feelings being forced upon us. We were taught it by our environment. It's not something that we would have naturally assumed without it being taught by somebody. Yeah. The average child is very humble to their own emotions, particularly of grief. Most children within the first day of their life cry quite easily.
Yes.
And it demonstrates how humble they are to the emotion of grief. That only changes because the environment forced the change.
Yeah. Okay, so basically you've outlined 4 different types or reasons.
And of course we could list more. I think it's very important for our listeners to see that we could have listed more, but these gives them some ideas for themselves when they revert to this adult rage that they have, or anger that they have, or annoyance that they have. What's really going on inside of themselves is a lot of quite dark things going on inside of yourself when you revert to this behaviour. Yeah. And you need to allow yourself to experience the anger still, but as soon as you experience it using one of these 4 methods, you are way out of line with experiencing it in harmony with any love.
Yes.
You can be angry and not sin. That's the reality. You can be angry and still be loving by experiencing your anger in harmony with love. All of these ways that we've already listed are all out of harmony with love. Mm-hmm. They're all ways to control, manipulate your environment, blame your environment, punish your environment, or feel powerful, and none of them work, by the way. No. None of them will get you to your causal emotion. None of them will help you get closer to God. So in a way, they're all pointless experiences unless you're feeling your anger and actually doing it in a manner that's in harmony with love, which is just feeling it.
So being responsible about the expression of it.
Yes, and understanding that you have it because you want some addictions met, and being willing to go and find those addictions, whatever they are, to be willing to face them. Yeah. What are my addictions? Why do I get angry here? Yeah. So if you look at the average guy who gets jealous of his girlfriend, he's angry because of something going on inside of him, right, that's not he's not feeling safe in the relationship anymore. That's why he's angry.
Yeah.
So it might be something where she isn't making him feel safe. It might be something where he is unsafe.
Yes.
Or it might be something where he isn't, but he's just imagining he is.
Yes.
It could be either. But if he allows himself to feel it without projecting all the crap on her, then he'll find out, oh, no, it's because I do feel this leakage of sexual energy from you to that person, and that's what makes me feel unsafe. And sure, I've got to go and feel unsafe about that, but I think you've got an issue with the leakage of sexual energy that you've got to address if you want to have a relationship with me, right? Yeah. So you can work through those particular issues as long as you're honest about feeling it, and owning it yourself.
Yeah.
If the man in that state says, right, I'm going to get violent with you, right? If you're the woman and I'm the man in that state, and I get violent with you to force you to, to not be involved with that man or in any way, then I am completely now in a very dark state with regard to the exercise of my anger. I'm not owning it. I'm not feeling it. I'm not looking at the reason why I have it. I'm blaming you. I'm trying to punish you for what I believe is your creation of my anger.
Yeah.
And that's all out of harmony with self-responsibility, all out of harmony with love.
Yeah. And the anger itself is generated because we don't want to be responsible
for
what's already in us.
Correct.
Yeah.
The anger is coming from an addiction inside of us. Unless we're willing to find that addiction, we will revert to anger every time that addiction is not met. So we need to see that the anger is the direct result of our own desire to avoid our fears and our own desire to have our addictions met. And we need to see it as such. And we need to be willing at some point, if we ever want to be close to God or ever want to love, we need to be willing at some point to go, I want to see what the addiction is. I want to feel that addiction instead of getting angry all the time. I want to feel the fear that I have that's underneath that addiction. I want to feel what's driving me towards this rage. And it's only then that the rage will dissipate.
Yeah.
The rage will dissipate when you're willing to feel the actual addiction itself and to feel the terror or fear that drives it. Then you won't have any problem with the rage anymore.
Yeah.
It'll be something that's rare in your life if it ever occurs at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. It's a great description and very comprehensive explanation of the different damaging ways we frequently use anger. And what I'm thinking about as you're speaking about that is that we can do all these things, control or manipulate, punish, blame, feel powerful and avoid feeling weak. And it's not necessarily through a screaming rage. Sometimes it's a mild sense of what we call frustration, but we are actually acting to control and punish and blame through that.
Yeah, you can even feel it as a pushiness, emotional pushiness. You meet a lot of people who never revert to overt rage, who are terribly emotionally pushy. They have huge amounts of anger in them, and they have learnt to not express their anger verbally or emotionally. They've learnt to become pushy emotionally, to try to force you emotionally. They become persistent. People who just nag and nag and nag and nag. And there's another expression of anger. So there is so many passive-aggressive ways to express anger that the majority of people learnt many ways because as a child they couldn't overtly express anger. They couldn't do it as they really felt it. So they learnt to do it in different ways. Yeah. They learnt it by becoming resistive, by manipulation, by control, by all sorts of other methods. But it's still anger.
Yeah. It's
still anger driving the behaviour.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at some point they're going to have to connect to that anger and feel it and feel what the addiction is driving it. Yeah. We see many people in that state. There are many people who come along to our sessions after 5 years they've not got beyond their anger. And they believe they have. They believe they're no longer angry or whatever, and they're just highly manipulative individuals who have no desire to get into any of their addictions.
Yeah.
And the more we tell them, the more enraged they become. And eventually they burst. And usually it's not pretty.
No.
Because it means that, they harm a lot of people once that they burst.
Yeah.
Many people have no idea how to experience anger in a way that doesn't sin.
Yeah.
You know, and the reason is because they don't want to take any responsibility for it.
I was going to say, it's not like you haven't told us all how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just there's a desire lacking to do it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It requires, a great deal of exercise of your will to experience your anger in a way that's in harmony with more love than it does to do all of these other things we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And most people don't have that much desire to have their addictions confronted. They have a desire to have their addictions met, not confronted. Yeah. And hence anger is often the common way of, you know, reverting or getting the environment back to meeting your addictions.
Yeah.
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 So that's what anger is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's such a damaging emotion. It as it in itself is the most common emotion in the hells of the spirit world.
Yeah.
Anger and fear are the two most common emotions in the spirit world, in the hells.
Yeah.
And those two emotions obviously range from slight annoyance to, and then slight anxiety to to whatever it is, the other extreme.
Terror,
in terms of fear and anger. But the reality is they are both very, very, very damaging emotions on this planet and also in the spirit world, in the hells of the spirit world. And they are very damaging emotions to the soul of an individual. And unless you're willing to feel them, you will never progress, ever. Yeah. And there are many people who have never progressed for thousands of years as a result of being resistive to truly feeling their anger or their fear, rather than just reverting to their anger in order to get their addictions met.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about codependent addiction, haven't we? And it's almost, sometimes we have it between us on earth, we have it between us and individual spirits. But sometimes it feels to me like at the moment the earth and the lower spheres of the spirit world are in one huge codependence. Yeah, where fear and anger is fostered, and honoured in the lower realms. And
I'll give you a few examples. You know, I think we mentioned a few in other FAQs, but you know, this whole thing that happened with World Vision.
Yeah.
That's an example. World Vision wanted to change their rules to allow for married gay couples to work in their organisation. There was a huge amount of anger in the Christian community, which is all based on their own addictions.
Yes.
None of it's loving.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what reason they give, the Bible says this or whatever, none of it's loving.
Yeah.
None of it's in harmony with love.
Yeah.
And the fear of the World Vision organisation was manipulated through this anger, which was the purpose of the people who were angry.
Yep.
There's an example of somebody who's going to arrive in the hells.
Yeah.
A Christian Christian who did that, those Christians who did that, will arrive in the hells because they have reverted to violence and manipulation in order to get what they want.
Yeah.
And they're willing to even see the death of children in order to get what they want.
Yeah.
That's how strong their manipulation of their terror, and their manipulation driven by their addiction was. So there's an example.
Yeah.
As an example of how the world works.
Yeah.
We've had recent examples in our personal life with trying to get venues for us to do presentations in or assistance groups in. You see these examples all the time where compromises are constantly met based upon who's the person who's most angry.
Yes.
Now, if we all base our life around the person who's most angry, there is not going to be any improvement in what happens on earth.
No.
At all.
No.
And if we do keep doing that in the spirit world, there'll be no improvement in what happens in the spirit world either, in the lower spheres.
Yeah.
We have to learn to stop doing that. We have to learn to stop supporting anger, start seeing anger as a desire in the individual to just have their addiction met, and to refuse the meeting of that addiction. Yeah. We need to learn that. So, these are all things we need to learn about anger.
Thank you.